Okay, so hi. So I'm Simon Clavet from Ubisoft Montreal. So I just did this talk yesterday, but now I'm doing it again with an empty room. So it's just for you with camera over there. So people at home, hi, and on the GDC vault, just for you. It's just me and you now. So we're here to talk about motion matching. So first, to get this out of the way, I'm an animation programmer at Ubisoft Montreal. I've been there for the last 10 years. These are some of the games I've worked on. But now I'm on this new thing that that is called For Honor. It's we showed it at E3 last year, and the idea is that it tries to answer the fantasy of running around the battlefield with your friends. Like you can be a knight, a samurai, or a Viking. There's lots of characters you can choose from in each of these factions. So yeah, it's really like a realistic medieval combat. So there's a campaign, there's a multiplayer. These are little AI guys that are really easy to kill. But normally, when you find another player character, you can lock on them. Then you can choose your stance and attack and block attacks. So it's really like slow pace. So it's not a button mashing game. You really need to read the attacks of your opponents. And yeah, so you have multiple types of attacks. There's light attack, heavy attack on the bumper and the trigger. There's a nice little finish kill there. So it's 4v4. Like there's two. The goal is to capture points on the map. Like there's a couple of zones that you can capture by controlling them. So you see the kind of animation challenges we're having. Like we want really precise contacts, really detailed animations. So we think that's a game that people would like to play. So from an animation standpoint, our goal is to have really precise gameplay, so people need to be able to read the attacks, like the tells needs to be really clear, so that people can like really learn and become really better at the game by learning what like the timings and things like that. But at the same time, we want really believable animation. So it's still a little bit more awesome than real life, but still like there's no magic, there's no dragons. It's really like realistic, even if in real life Vikings never actually fought the samurais, but it's still believable. So this talk. So I'm going to show a little history of animation systems to show the road to where we are now. And I'll introduce motion matching, this new animation technology. I'll show a little bit of workflow in our editor, how we work. And finally, I'll show little procedural touch-ups to really adapt the animation to the environment and the precise gameplay we need. But first, I'll show a little bit more of the results. So we'll focus first on navigation. At the end, I'll talk about other things than navigation. But yeah, so here's our female warden. So it's the first female version of our knight champion. Look at the different transitions, like this start, really detailed starts and stops. So it's really an infinite stop. Like the stop really just continues playing and becomes the idle. Here's our samurai assassin character. It's really quick. Really detailed style, so it's all full body. Everything you see is just all full body animation. There's no layers. In some examples, there's other cases we need layers, but not like most of the time. There's no layers playing. It's just full body animation. Here's our male warden. So you can walk, you can jog, you can sprint. See the kind of response you get when you start and stop. Like it takes about a meter to start and less than 1 second to stop. And Here, really a nice transition. Like this was really captured at the mocap, so we really want to see the kind of things that we saw on the mocap floor. You see we have strafe animation when you're locked on an enemy. You see like stance changes, all full body transitions to switch stance. So you're going to attack on this side and block also on this side. So when you dance around your opponent, you would like to match his stance if you want to block him. Okay, so back to the beginning. So how does all of this thing starts? So in the beginning, the first day, God created this function called play anim. So this is something you call on your character when you want to play an animation on him. So you have this function somewhere in your code that you can call whenever you like. So let's say I want to walk. I'm going to play the start animation. So we have a start animation, we're going to play it. And then when we're at the end of this animation, we're going to play a loop, like a walk loop, so it's going to start over and over again. And then when you don't want to walk anymore, you play a stop animation. So you can do all of that like hard-coded in the code somewhere. But obviously that's not what we do anymore. We want to have a visual representation of that. So we have a visual state machine. With these states are the loops that you're going to play. And you could have like in the transition, in these arrows, it could be a blend. For a little while you blend the two animations together. Or you could have a transition animation or a transition state in the middle. So you can decide how you're going to structure that. And it could, like, so everything is there. Like every moves you can do in the game is there in the state machine. It could be hierarchical, it could become pretty complicated. You need to deal with all these transitions. And the gameplay will control this state machine by sending a list of parameters that you could, and in these transitions, there's going to be criteria on these parameters to decide if you want to transition from state to state. Or you could have like direct signals from the gameplay. You could say like transition. The other way of seeing the problem is, let's say every frame you evaluate this function here. Like if the speed is bigger than some number, you're going to run. Or if the speed is like lower but still bigger than 0, you're going to walk. Or else, if it's 0, you play the idle animation. So this would get evaluated every frame. So like a decision system. So it's a decision tree that here it's hard-coded. But again, you can have a visual representation of that. So that's a decision tree or a blend tree if you want to have like to blend animations together. So in this system, the idea is that the animation comes in from the right and they get decided upon or mixed together in these nodes in the middle. And on the left, it's going to output an animation. And again, we have a bunch of parameters that you can use to decide how you're going to blend the animations together. So you could like, for example, blend a jog with a sprint to get the velocity you need. And you could have real criteria, like to decide which branch to take. So again, it could become pretty complicated, and you could have a different. So you could have different animations for the upper body and lower body, and like every limb could be controlled independently in a piece of the graph, if you want. And you would have one of these for each state in your state machine. So it's going to be a state machine of blend trees, and you could also have a state machine inside a node in your blend tree, so it's going to become a state machine of blend trees, of state machine of blend trees, and it could be all hierarchical, so it could get like a big spider web that's going to control your character. So, first question. So we're going to play a little game now. So I'm going to do a move here. So when you tell me, like with, find a nomenclature, so how would you name this move first? Like what's the name of the file for this move? And where do you want to put that in your structure? So it's this. I'll do it again. This thing here. So I would call that the start strafe 90 turn on spot 45 stop. And this is a thing that you don't actually really want to have to find a name for, I think. So, and if you want to put that in somewhere in your blend tree or your state machine somehow, good luck with that. Like, and this is like the first intuition. Like we kind of need more to be able to deal with these crazy kind of navigation, awkward things. So to go back to the blend tree, there's some big nodes there that could have lots of animations in there. And it's going to choose how to play these animations in a smart way. So it's called the parametric blends. So in this setup, what you have is a couple of dimensions, for example, speed, strafe angle, and slope. You can have multiple, like lots more dimensions, and each of these dots there is a loop that blends well with the other ones. And then when the gameplay wants specific speed and specific strafe angle and specific slope, it's going to find a mix of animations to blend together to get as close as possible as what you want. So again, like here, each column is a dimension. So an animator had marked up all these values for these parameters. Each line is a loop that's supposed to blend well with each of them. And some of the columns it's not a float value, it's a discrete value. So this is like a tag to be able to decide like which group of animation I want. So here in this setup, you would have like an anim query that comes from the gameplay. So the gameplay code would make this thing, this anim query, and add desired features to it. So in this case, the gameplay says, I want to find an animation that has a speed of 3 meters per second, and a slope of 35 degrees, and a strafe angle of 90 degrees. And then this function called compute blend factors would give you how much of every animation you need to mix together to get as close as possible as what you want. So it would be like radial basis functions or some other things. You could have like manually placed like triangles. If it's just in 2D, normally animators want to set up their triangles and then the barycentric coordinates of in this triangle tells you how you're going to blend these 3 animations at the corners of the triangle. So it brings me to my second question. So let's look at this animation here. So you see a start followed by a little bit of like bank loop. So my question is, like, is there a way to deal with loops and transitions in a uniform way? So like the intuition here is that a loop is nothing special really. It's just something that blends well, like the end will blend well with the beginning. And that's it. Like it's a transition, but happens to blend well with the beginning. So you can play it over and over again. The other thing you can see here is that at some point the start animation becomes the loop, but it's really hard to decide exactly when you want to finish your start and become the loop. So it's not a really fun decision to make when you have to decide, okay, this is exactly when the start is over and the loop starts. So it's a decision that you don't actually really want to make. So looking at this problem, these guys, like 15 years ago, came up with the motion graphs. And here, the idea is that you have a non-structured list of long animations. And as a preprocess, you can figure out when you can jump to somewhere else in this database of animations. So this would be the places where the poses match. So if the pose match well enough and the velocity is the same, approximately, then you have a transition point there. And so yeah, so you have your animations here. Like every time you get to a transition point, you can then decide where to go from a list of possibilities. So you're going to walk around these animations. And then a path on this graph gives you your animation. So, question 3. How do we choose the next animation? So, there's a couple things you can do. So, one idea is to use the concept of machine learning. It's called reinforcement learning. So you can, as a preprocess, you can see how good an animation is to reach a specific goal. Let's say you're going to preprocess for each goals, like for discrete directions you want to turn. Like for, let's say, if I want to turn left, you're going to first rate every little piece of animation for how good is it to play this if you want to go in this direction. So Michael Butner, a guy like 3 years ago, did a really nice talk here, and he talked about how he did that in Hitman. And now Michael Butner is now in Toronto. We hired him, so he's doing his version of motion matching at his studio. We actually have like 4 or 5 different productions in Ubisoft that actually are looking into this kind of technology. So we have all our like version of that. But the problem with that is that for comfortable control, you need a really dense graph because you're always kind of waiting for a transition point. So you can't really turn right away. You need to finish the little piece of animation, like a step or something, to be able to finally branch out and go to some other animation. So that's why in Hitman it was only used for NPCs, because it was not responsive enough for the main character. So it brings us to motion fields. So motion fields is another really cool paper, came out 10 years ago. And if you read that, like, it really feels like something that you want to try. So our representation organizes samples of motion data in a high-dimensional generalization of a vector field, which we call a motion field. Our runtime motion synthesis mechanism freely flows through the motion field in response to user commands. So it really sounds like something that, oh, maybe that's a solution. So yeah, so again, you have this value function that, like, for each possible goal, that tells you how to steer around this magical world of streams of animations all around in this high-dimensional space. So, and you get more response. So here you see on the left, there's a graph solution with like a static graph. So you see the kind of like the lack of response that we talked about on the left. It takes some time for the guy to actually follow the arrow. On the right, you see the field version, so it's much more responsive. So it's going to blend animations together and transition quicker. So it's going to interrupt animations to go and play a mix of other animations somewhere. So it's going to flow really through this motion field. So what's the problem with that? Like, what's the problem with motion field? Why did, like, we don't, like, in games, I don't think, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think motion field has been really used in the game. And so what's the problem? The problem is, like, when you read this paper, like, when you're like halfway through, you feel that, like, maybe it sounds a little bit complicated. Like, it's you feel that you actually don't really need this level of complexity to achieve, like, what you really need. So it feels like a little bit overkill, maybe. It still works, but it's really hard. It's really hard to make it work. So maybe that's the only reason why it's not used in game. Maybe it's a performance problem or memory problem, but I really feel that it's a complexity problem. So the thing to realize here is maybe we don't need, like, these complicated value functions. It could be like the more greedy approach of just looking at, like, really simply, like, does this piece of motion brings me where I want? And these distance functions that they use, like disparity matrix and all of this, could be much simpler. So we're going to just use the main idea of this paper. So really simple idea, really powerful. So we can jump to any other frame whenever we want. So that's the whole thing. That's the whole idea. So we know now that we can just find a little piece of data and just play it right now. So last question, question 4. Look at this complicated stop animation. So really detailed, lots of steps, or lots of detailed things that happened. So how do we choose the correct start time in a stop animation? When do you want to start playing it? Let's say I'm running around, I'm looping my animations, and I'm in this specific pose here. So maybe I want to start the stop animation at a pose that really looks like it. So first you need to choose which stop animation you're going to take. So maybe in your game you have like a version for when you have the left foot forward and a version for the right foot forward. But then you want to start playing it maybe at the beginning of your stop animation, but you could also start playing it exactly when the pose match. Like you start your stop exactly when the pose match. Or velocity matching, because sometimes you just started, like you're playing the start animation, stop playing. Bah. Yeah, so let's say you just started your start animation, so you're just halfway through it, so you don't have full velocity. So you want to start your stop animation, then you don't want to play the full stop because you would increase your speed and then slow down, so that would feel bad. So it's better to just match the velocity and start your stop animation at the place where you have, that's the velocity that you have now in the game. Or if you're an NPC, maybe you want to do precise end position matching. So you want to end up at a specific point in the world. So you're going to play your stop, and you start your stop to make sure that you're going to end at the correct place. Or maybe a clever mix of all of the above. So that's where you start to see that we're going to rate these places in the animation to decide, and I'm going to add multiple costs to decide which one is the best. So we introduced today motion matching. So I talked about like different versions of that in the past a little bit, but today I want to really make it clear like this actually works and it's awesome, it's simple, it's easy to implement. So it's a ridiculously brute force approach to animation selection. So we're going to go full force with that. So the whole algorithm is really simple. It's just that every frame we're going to look at all mocap and we're going to jump at the best place. So every candidate jumping point has a cost. And if the candidate matches the current situation perfectly, and the piece of motion that follows it brings us where we want to be, then the cost is 0. So we see that there's two parts of on the cost function, like the current pose and velocity, and the future trajectory that we need to match also. So that's it. So the input of the algorithm is a bunch of mocap here. Here we tried it with a really specific style, like the style of Very Tired. So it's really detailed, really full body, really hard to match a pose, really hard to separate in small pieces. So yeah, so we don't have to manually segment these starts and stops and turns. So that was like our first test, like one of the first tests like 3 years ago. And we just directly plugged that into the game, like 5 or 10 minutes of animations. And then, yeah, the algorithm is that every frame you're going to choose which little piece of animation to play. And this is the result. Like you see, it's trying to follow the red arrow there. So here I've disabled the blending so that you can see the animation when they switch. So they switch a lot, like it switches like many times per step. But we blend a little time for a little while when switching animation, so it's okay. So now I really enable the blends. So you see it tries to follow the desired trajectory. Here's another example with the walks. See the little mocap routine that we have on the left. And you see on the right, on the floor, the red path is a desired trajectory. It is sent by gameplay every frame. And the blue path is the currently playing animation. You see every time the blue path switches, it means that the animation switched. Yeah, so now when we go to the mocap, like, so the way in our game, the way it works is that like we have multiple characters, like many characters. It's not just one samurai, one Viking, and one knight. There's multiple, there's lots of them. So we go to the mocap and we capture like the specific style of this character. Sometimes there's a female version also. So we came up with a routine. Like we're getting better and better at our routine. So it takes like 15 minutes. Or 20 minutes, and like there's a pull of shots there, maybe 6 or 7 shots. And I'll show all of it. It's for this, the warden. Like, so this is for the relaxed navigation. So there's also the combat navigation for every stance. But here we start with a bunch of turn-on spots, like at 45 degrees resolution. Then the interrupted starts. That's what would happen if you just push the stick and let it go. Then a bunch of repositions. So repositions is just a little displacement without turning, just to make sure that you can get to a specific point in the world that is just around. So it really helps to have that at the end of the stops. So these are the starts and stops. So you start with every direction. So you start at 45. Then a bunch of circles, like different radii. Then the planned 45 and the 135 that we do at the same time. So with this little pattern on the floor, you see the 45 and then 135. Then some variations of the planned 90 degrees. So a couple of them, like to start with a different foot. And then the planned 180. For the strafe, combat strafes, you would start with a square. Like you do a square to get all these lines and the 90 degrees plants. You do it both sides. And then you do a diamond, like this, to get the diagonals. And then we have this, what we call this, like the strafe, the plant star of death, that really kills the stuntman because it needs to plant really strong on each corner of this star there. And then he's really, really tired, and so we can capture the tired version of all of this. So then I'm going to show a little bit of code. Like it's really actually very simple, so I really want to convince you to like just go home and try it. So you remember the current animation index, so which animation we're playing, and at what time we are in this animation. So just remember that. And then every frame you're going to get called this update. We call it ammo update. Our system is called ammo in our code for automatic motion. So we get sent a goal every frame and DT to say how much you want to advance. And I'll show later what is actually our goal structure. In the goal, it's everything that in the gameplay needs the animation to do. So it's really a little pack of information, like a little data structure that's going to tell you what you need to do for the next second or something. So we're going to increase our current anim time with DT. And then we're going to evaluate the current pose. So what is a pose? It's just actually like a wrapper for which animation index it is and which time it is in the animation. And there's also in the pose a little bit piece of data to be able to compute the cost function quickly. For example, like for the pose matching, we're going to need some bone positions in the world. So in the pose, we're going to pre-compute these things. I'll talk about in more detail what is actually in the pose, but remember it's just everything we need to be able to compute the cost function. So we call this function evaluate lerped pose from data because what we have is we pre-computed the pose like but for like 10 times per second. So we have 10 hertz resolution for these poses. So we're going to lerp in between two. You could also use like normal animation tracks for that. So you decide. And then it's going to be a loop on all poses. So you're going to remember the best cost to date and the best pose to date. And you're going to actually loop on all this array poses. It's like you're going to prepare that. Like it's going to be like going like all the animations are in there. And so you have this candidate pose that you're going to evaluate with this function compute cost. It's going to take the current pose and the candidate pose and a goal. And then if this cost is smaller than the best cost to date, just remember it. So that's it. Like that's like logically that's what happens. I'm going to show like optimizations a little bit later, but logically what you're doing is just try to find something that has a small cost. But then, normally, if you don't move the stick too much, maybe the one that's going to win is the one that you were about to play anyway, if you stayed in the animation. So that's what this is trying to do. So the winner is at the same location. It means the same animation index, and the current anim time is close enough to the winner's anim time. But if it's not at the same location, like if it's somewhere else in the mocap, then you just go there. Like with this function, play anim starting at time. So you say like play this animation at this time with this little blend time, like 0.25. It could be like 0.5 or 0.4 or something. So you just blend there. And then we just need to talk about this function, like compute cost, that takes the current pose, candidate pose, and the goal. So there's going to be two parts in there. So the first part will be current cost. So this doesn't take the goal as argument, it's only the current pose and candidate pose. So now I talk more about what's actually in there, in the pose that so and the trick is to just pose match only a few bones. Like you don't have like the full like distance metric, you don't actually need it for just keeping the cycle of enemy. Like the trick is, the goal is just to be able to keep the cycle of running around. But without actually computing like this number between 0 and 1 that says where you are in the cycle. The reason for that is like it's really actually hard for starts and stops and complicated turn on spot, and like when you scuff around a little bit, sometimes if this same foot moves twice, so then there's no phase there. Like it's ill-defined. So yeah, so the pose and velocity matching, actually first thing to match is the local velocity. You want to match that. And the feet position in like character global space, like character local, so these positions. And foot velocities and weapon position, maybe. You could match that to, like we'll talk about combos a little bit later. So let's say you have two attacks, two versions of an attack. That one that starts with some pose and one that starts with another pose. Then maybe just the weapon position will allow you're going to be able to find which variation to take to just pose match the weapon. So the trick then is you can add as many things as you want there. If you want to match the head orientation, you can match all the things you need, like the torso orientation. Maybe you need that sometime. And the trick is to pre-compute that and save it somewhere like it's really like compact in memory, so it's like all at the same place, so that like it's like really efficient to loop on that. So like really fast cost computation. So everything is there. So the real reason why we do that is that like the animations, the format we use is normally local angles. So you don't have to do a full resolve. You don't want to have to do a resolve of the skeleton to find the positions and velocities of feet to be able to, so during this really hot loop of cost computation. So here we see what happens if you disable pose matching. So you see there's something fishy happening with the feet there. It's just because he can't keep the cycle. He just continues playing the animation, but when he switches animation, there's no notion of like where should my feet be. So that's why he can't really keep the cycle. Like the next part is now how to follow a desired trajectory. So then you can like try to do an abstracting, like the desired velocity, like just one like angle. Maybe you want to do some, maybe a speed and a direction. So you want to like to abstract something, but that's actually not what we're doing. So what we want is actually to match a pattern on the floor. So the gameplay will really give you a desired trajectory, and you want to match that. And the trick is just to check really where a piece of animation brings you if you play it. You don't have to, like it's a greedy search, like you don't have to play a little piece of animation to be able to then play another animation and pre-compute what you need to do. So yeah, so the trick is then like every little piece of animation in your mocap, you need to turn it to bring it aligned with your entity now in the world. So you just have to remove a rotation and then rotate it again to match your entity. So now I'll talk in more detail about what's in the goal actually to specify what is a desired trajectory. So it's actually just an array of trajectory points. So a trajectory point would be a position in the world, an orientation in the world. So this is to control the sight of the guy. If you're strafing and maybe if you turn on spot, you want to control the future sight, the facing. And the nice thing here is that you have a time delay. So it's a list of points that you want to be there at a specific time in the future. So in our case, we use 4 or 3 or like a small number like that, not 10, not just 1. So with 4 points, I would place one at like one at 0.2 seconds, and one at 0.4, and one at 0.7, and one at 1 second in the future. So like these 4 points are like distributed there in the future, for the future plan for the next second. And then in this goal, you can add more things. So for example, in our game, like this concept of stance is important. So you could say like which stance I'm in, and then you're gonna add more things in this goal. So here, like this, for the cost of the future position, so it's just the difference between where, like the red thing is where you want to be in the future in 1 second. And for this candidate, the blue path, it would be this candidate here. This is where the animation brings you. So the cost is just this distance on the floor. You can square it also. It makes it like a smoother a little bit. So you can square all these costs so that it's like a Euclidean distance. And then you can look at future orientation. So you can compare really the angles that the animation is and where you want to be. You can also compare this velocity. So now you start to see that like to really match a pattern, it's nice to have these derivatives there. You can match the future velocity and acceleration to really find a shape there. And then we're going to add it to the compute cost function. So that's the second part. So it's how much the candidate pace of motion matches the desired trajectory. So here, this compute future cost doesn't take as argument the current pose. It's really just the candidate pose that says like where you are like in the animation, and it's just going to evaluate in the animation forward. Or if you could actually take these forward positions and velocity and actually place it in the pose data structure so that you don't have to actually go poke in the animation. But that's actually not really different. Like you can just go in animation and look what's in there in these poses or in the animation itself. Like in your displacement track in your animation, you can know like where it brings you. And now the fun part is this, like responsiveness or responsivity, I'm not sure. So here is really the fun part. Like now you're able to tweak. Like that was the holy grail. Like you have the slider between realism and responsiveness, and then you can tweak that until the animators are happy with the realism, and the 3C like control designers are happy with the comfort. So now we can match more things. So I talked about stance a little bit. Like here's we have the stuntman at the floor. We told them to just switch stance like this, a little bit randomly, walking around, like doing squares on the mocap floor, while switching stance while moving. So and then we marked up like with little events on the animation. Like we place events that says, okay, this is the new stance, and you mark it up, you say what stance it is. So we don't automatically detect which stance it is, because like this sounds, for this guy it's simple, like this is his stance. But all our characters have really crazy different stances, and we just mark it up like by hand. Because like, we could do like a really pose detection, like that would be actually, I think, pretty easy to do, but we didn't do it. Like I encourage you to do it. Like if you want to detect automatically these kind of things, that's perfectly doable. And then the trick here is that when you evaluate a candidate, let's say I'm evaluating this candidate now, and in the goal it's specified that I want to be in right stance, but then we just look in the future and see, oh, this is the correct stance to be, so it's going to give points. Like the cost will be like lower, like because you're in the correct stance in the future, it matches your stance now, so it's going to find the transitions automatically. So here you see the result, like with all these nice little plans, and you can switch stance. And the trick is that if you forgot to capture a specific stance transition, then it's going to just blend, so it's going to fill holes with blends. So then you can capture more. If you go back to Mocap Studio and capture a little bit more, then you're going to pick up these new transitions that you just added. So it's going to find them when they exist, and this way you're going to be able to deal with this dimensionality explosion. So if you have holes in your coverage, like you have so many dimensions that you're sure that you won't have the corners of your coverage space. So you need to be able to deal with holes like that. So I'll talk very briefly about optimizations because we have a really aggressive LOD. So that means like people that are far away won't get an update every frame. So in this case, they just need to continue playing their animation. So that you need to make sure that there's always some room left at the end of your animations without like going into pose really quick, so that when you can still continue playing your animation a little bit. Then also, if you manage to place all these things that you need for the cost function in like local space in your pose itself, and if you make your cost, your compute cost really a distance function in a 3D, like a multiple dimension Euclidean space, then you can place that in a KD tree and do approximate nearest neighbor on that to find the closest one, and it becomes actually like instant to find the best candidate. There's lots of other things you can do, so I won't go into details, but there's lots of things we do. In Toronto, in their version, they have a different strategy. Like everyone has this little strategy for optimization. So we'll talk about that later in another talk probably. So we'll go in more details about how we deal with, like, we make this trajectory from the gameplay. I said the gameplay sends the trajectory, how we make it. But before, we need to talk about like displacement. So every game animation engine needs to decide if you want to do displacement from animation. So the animation, when you play it, it actually moves your character in the world. Or you want to do displacement from the code, from the simulation code, and then you just place your animation on top of it. So there's like good reasons for each of these. So, but in our case, we want to use the code. Like the code decides the real simulation point. It's a simulation. It's an abstract thing. Like it's really the combat designers want to have control and position. So it's kind of sad for us, like animation people. Like we need to get used to it. But yeah, so animation is really important, but it's still a cosmetic, like an aesthetic thing. Like it's a dress up. It's a skin on the simulation. So we have the entity that would have the skeleton, and we have this simulation point that needs to be as close as possible together, but not necessarily perfectly together. So like the trick here is that, so to have a really like a simple model of navigation. So it says like kind of accelerations you get, like the stiffness of like the velocity, how it changes. So our trick is just to have a critically damped spring damper that's going to smooth out the velocity. So there's these parameters, and this damper is like the stiffness of it would be like the third derivative of position. Like it's called a jerk in the mathematical terms. Like we say, it's the change of acceleration. So like if it's the speed at which I'm bringing up my acceleration. And then the maximum acceleration also, because you could clamp it somehow. So we have like 2 or 3 numbers to tweak this simulation. And it's actually pretty simple, and it's easy to understand for a player. A player touches the stick, he says, okay, there's more inertia that I'm used to, but at least it's really easy to understand. So the time it takes to stop and the time it takes to start, it's almost the same, like it's really consistent. Like the turn radii you get when you try to turn, it's just, yeah, you feel a little bit of inertia, but it's really simple to understand, and people can now predict where they're going to end up. So that's actually better. So the goal is not just to be as responsive as possible. The goal is to be as predictable as possible, so that player can really, oh, that's how it works, and then they can play, and they feel it okay. Like you don't want to be like too much inertia. Like you need to, when like the time it takes, you look on the floor, like it took approximately like 1 meter to stop. I think that's that's much less than what it would take in real life, but still a little bit more than like in shooters. Sometimes it's like, since we're not a shooter, we can get away with a little bit more. But I think that would work also for a shooter. If you're working on a shooter that has this gameplay of like picking off like these walls, and you need to really be super responsive for navigation, I think you can just still do that, but just make it a little bit stiffer maybe. And then you choose, as I said, you choose animations that will follow this simulation point around. And then we can still do a little bit of displacement from animation. So here's what's happened when you have a guy that tries to follow this point there on the floor. So we actually, like, this is this desired trajectory, and he just tries to follow it. But then the trick is just to clamp this entity some distance away from the simulation. I say 15 centimeters. So in this way, when you're idle and you're just idling around like this, your entity can stay with you, like with your center of mass. I like the entity to be at the center of mass because this is where the blends happen. So just compute an approximation of your center of mass, make sure that your entity is there. So if you like do this when you're idle, at least you stay some distance away from your simulation. And when you run around, if your style is from side to side, then you have like this little leg room there to be able to have your specific displacement style, but still have a like straight line for your simulation point. And that's very important to be there, like really close to your simulation point, because this is where the game thinks you are for real. Like the game actually. This is where you get hit. Like if someone hits you, you get hit at your simulation point. So if you're too far away, it's going to feel really bad to get hit there and you're not actually there. The fun thing you can do, like with this future trajectory prediction, so you can run it through the actual simulation code with all the collisions there to predict the future trajectory. So you can predict stops on walls and on ledges, and nice turns around the corner. So you see here in this case, we ran the simulation, it did the red thing, so it got clamped on the wall for a little while, and then it found out that, oh, it's gonna be able to turn later. So before getting to the corner, we already switched to animation that's gonna turn around the corner. So that's gonna give a really nice and smooth result around geometry. So here first you see the little stop, so a little while before getting to the wall, you're going to start playing the little stop. And then here you see the turn I just talked about, super smooth. And then you can also have a little piece of stop before the ledge. And yeah. So that's it for the motion matching part. So now I'll talk about still about motion matching, but more in detail about how we deal with it in the for the workflow in our editor. So the pipeline for animators and for designers is to, like, first the mocap is tweaked, imported and marked up, so they can tweak it to make it a little bit more awesome and clean up the contacts and clean up things to make sure that it's easy to read and like the contacts are well defined and everything. And then they're going to import it in the editor and mark it up with some events. So I'll talk about more about the event matching. So the idea here is that, at runtime, the gameplay will make a request, which will be this goal thing that I talk about. Sometimes I call it request, sometimes I call it goal and query, it's all the same thing. It's a desired trajectory and like the stance that I talked about, and event constraints, like event requests. So an event request is just, I'll talk about it in more detail, but the idea is just, if you don't ask for an event, that means you want navigation. But if you want for an event, you say when you want it to happen, and then it's like a plan for the future. I want this event, this type of event to happen like 0.8 seconds in the future or something. And then this system of matching outputs an animation. It's going to continuously find the best piece of data to play. And then we're going to modify the result to precisely match the gameplay and the environment. So there's going to be a little bit of theta k in there, and also corrections for entity rotation, things like that. So we still need some state machine. So I didn't talk about the state machine because I think it's a good idea to have just one state machine. And like if you have a choice between an animation state machine and a logic state machine, it's better to think of it as a logic state machine. Animations is just like flat and unstructured, and then your logic this is where the structure lives. So we have a simple timed, like not hierarchical state machine with these clips there. So these are logical clips that's gonna say like what the timing of the attacks and the blocks and everything. So this is where the fight designers will tweak what's the rule, what the actual rules of the game. And then it makes this request, and motion matching will try to find something that matches that. So here, like a little example with a combo, like this is the light attack, and then heavy attack. So here you see we're going through these little clips. We went through the miss, and we switched to the next one because we pressed an input at the right time. So you see, like right now, I'm pressing a button. So you see why? It's because there's a branching there. You see, I'll show it with, over there. There was a little time window in the previous clip. And this branching became true because this condition became true. It's a callback in the code. And it says like the button is pressed. So in this case here, the guy blocked me. So I'm going to transition, like this time window, it branches to, you see the attack recoveries. So for each attack, there's going to be somewhere around there, there's going to be like the recoveries. It's the possible outcomes for your attacks. So you can get blocked, you can hit, you can get interrupted if you hit a wall. Here we got blocked, so this is the clip. So this is the time it takes when you get blocked. So this is the actual currency of our game, is the time. Like these little gray boxes are 100 milliseconds. So now we can place where the time windows are to when you're able to switch stance and dodge and things like that. So now it's longer. Like I increased the clip length, so it took longer to recover. So then from an animation, animators, the way they work is they kind of place these little events. And the idea here is that the events are placed not at the beginning of the move or at the end necessarily. It's just at the most significant moment in the move as determined by convention. So for attacks, in our case, it's at the moment of contact of the weapon. This is where the event is. You could have multiple events in the same animation. So like you don't have to just have one event in the animation. So like on the mocap floor, we could have like the guy just fighting and just like continue recording and have multiple events in there. And then the clip says, I want this event to happen exactly at this moment. It's the little yellow thing on the clip. It's an event request. So it's going to make sure that the event happens at this time. So the events have a type, which will get requested by the clip. And we can add also on the events a bunch of little constraints. It's just tags. It's like more meaning, like to say like this, which type of tag it is, or like some things like the stance and like if you have a tired version, you would say like a tired, like no stamina or something. And yeah. So if you want to add the same parameter to each event of an animation, then you can place it at the level of the animation. These are the one on the right. So in the columns on the right, you see this is the same kind of constraint there. So it's going to group animations together by these parameters, so that it's easier for animators to find them. So you're going to have like these big groups of animations. That will be separated on subgroups for the one that share the same parameters, and then more events in there. So everything is laid up like this. Then the displacement, like the movement, like the velocities and things like that, the way they are tweaked. The combat designer really want precise control. Like the ranges of attacks is something that's really important, so they want to be able to tweak it really easily. So here, like we're going to change the movement type, so just a normal navigation. And if I change the speed, you see that it's going to switch which animation get picked up in the big list of animation. So like you go to the walk, and if I put 0 speed, then it's going to be idle. So all the animations are there in this. It's the same clip that's playing. Doesn't switch clip when you start and stop. Then for during attacks, you can go like this is for each. There's these movement phases in the clips that says how you want to move, so you can have more reach and less reach, like by tweaking these numbers there. And it could switch animation, like it could change which animation get picked up, but you change your reach. So on other cases, you extract a movement curve when gameplay really trusts the animation and the movement is really complicated. Like for example, this move here, you throw the guy, that's a complicated movement, so you need to synchronize the two guys a little bit together. So then we actually do some version of displacement from animation in this case, because the gameplay says, okay, animation is too complicated, let's just play the animations and that's going to be okay. So then, a little bit of procedural touch-ups. So one thing is the orientation corrections for the entities. So we let the animation normally decide the rotation for turn-on spots. It's like in the start, like if I start running backwards, I'm going to turn gradually. So we let the animation decide that. So it's a style question. But we can correct it to match a future, correct it to match something. For example, the future desired position or the future desired orientation. So we're going to use rotation corrections to fix some little problems that you could have. So one of these problems is just when you run like this, you see there's always a little offset there between the animation and the simulation. You see this little angle there. The reason is because we didn't capture every turn and everything. Like at the mocap, we don't have an infinite amount of time, so we still have little errors all the time. So the trick is that it's really simple actually. So you look at where the simulation wants to be in the future and where the animation brings you, and then you can rotate over time to match the desired future position. And with that, you see that the blue path on the floor rotates a little bit all the time to correct for this little error. But then when you strafe around in combat, like the future orientation is more important than the future position. In this case, you're going to rotate entity to match this future orientation. So for example, a big unsheet animation that needs to finish like this on your target. If your animation brings you there, but the target is there instead, so over time, as you're rotating and aligning, you can correct over time to finish at the correct orientation. You can have also procedural rotation, but just on the skeleton. So you can have just upper body corrections like this. Or if you want to follow a specific speed and you're aligned like this, you can see it as like a lower body AMAT to correct for the speed, to have your speed in the correct direction. So your animation brings you there, and you're strafing like this, but you want to actually go somewhere else, so you can see it as a lower body AMAT. We can talk a little bit about time scale. So what if gameplay wants to double the speed of the animation here? So the trick with time scale is really easy. Again, you see the error that you're going to make. So you can time scale the animation according to this error ratio. So in this case here, you get a really fast result. So maybe that's not such a good idea. So I don't think you should time scale that much. So maybe you can maybe 10% faster and maybe 20% lower could work, but not much more than that. It's because often just sliding gives better result, and then you trust VTIK. That's going to fix the problems. So yeah, so VTIK is really important in our case, because there's lots of sliding, because we blend all the time. We always switch animation, so we don't even wait until the blend is finished to switch again and go to somewhere else. So we're always switching animation, so there's going to be lots of sliding. And also because we need to keep up with gameplay that goes at its own speed, and mocap matches as best as it can. But we ask the stuntman to run at 5.5 meters per second, but it's really hard to be exactly at the specific speed. So our trick for us, I won't talk a lot about that, but we could do a full presentation on that, but we don't need a preprocess for that, so we just lock the toe when it doesn't move too much in the main animation, like in the incoming animation or the one that has the most weight, and then we lock the foot. So we place a socket there, and then we do inverse kinematics to bring the toe where it's supposed to be. There's lots of details there to make sure that you don't break the pose and everything. But that's about it. So there's lots of things to talk about, lots of details there to make sure that you don't break the legs and everything. There's still lots of sliding, but it's still less than what it was before. Then we can warp on slopes and staircases. So the idea here is that you're going to throw some rays and find the ground. So the way we work is for slope warping, we don't really care if the foot is locked or not. We don't do like trajectory prediction and things. It really feel like it's like the feet are moving like this and doing crazy things. And all these movements is going to get warped like this on a virtual plane that we like. It's really smooth and changes smoothly like this. And you see you do the same animation but warped on this plane like this. So this is what's trying to show on the top here. You see you have your target ground now. You smooth it. And you tweak that ground smoothing carefully, and then you warp the full trajectory like that. So you see here in the animation, still not perfect. There's like a lot of like awkward things that happens, but it's really smooth, and you really keep the silhouette of the guy. You need to pull down the hips really smoothly to connect the lowest foot. And again, you prefer smoothness over absolute penetration prevention, because during these crazy moves, it's really important that you keep the correct animation. The animators really don't like it when you break your animation. So the most important thing is like never hyperextend the knees, like the knee that clicks like this. It's better you don't need to have perfect connection with the ground. It's better to never like actually bring the leg longer than what it was in the animation. One fun thing about motion matching is we can find like the sloped version of animations, like the slope animation on staircases automatically, because you remember these trajectory points were actually in 3D, so you can get like for free, you can choose the sloped version of animations. So when you play and go down a staircase, you see this kind of little subtle things. And for feed IK, it's important then that you correct only for what is missing from the animation, because you won't have like a version, like a start, and all these transition. So in this case, the IK does it, but when you get into the loop of going up or down, then you don't need that much IK anymore. And then, like this is without this spine pitch bending, so we need precise interaction, and like so we need to do something about like the guy now is now hitting on top of the other guy. So we do like really like the sword IK thing, but we found that we need a really general solution that's going to deal with like all these crazy moves. So the trick is actually to just make sure that what happens in this red rectangle stays the same. So what we do is just when the guys are like this, we just bend them like and distribute the rotation on like a couple of spine bones and bring them together like a little closer, so that what happens there, like with their upper bodies, is the same. So if one guy is like really taller than the other, also you can do something about that. So you can aim like this, and this is the result you get for a nice little fight in the staircases. You're going to see at the end of that a move that would be really hard to just do with like sword IK, like inverse kinematics, to really connect. Yeah, it was kind of disgusting, but yeah, it's all in the name of science and entertainment, so it's awesome. So future work. So what I want to do with that, so motion matching is about matching things, so we need to match more stuff. So if you want to do like climbing and free running and like monkey bars and everything, this is about matching surfaces. So in this case, the idea would be to match, like the animation wants a surface to be there to be a good animation to play. So you're going to rate all these candidates according to where the surfaces are in the animation. You're going to match them and see if in the world right now the surface is there. So it's going to give more points to this candidate. So you can have like aligned to monkey bars and climbing around and like a really nice climbing and free running system with like a unified, like even the landings, like for really far away, like you can like start playing your landing in advance because you see that there's a surface there that animation needs and it's there in the world, so it gives point to this candidate. Also, you can match interaction partners smartly. So it could be a person, it could be like maybe the ball, like in a soccer game, you can match the position of the ball, or the puck in a hockey game, or something. And the persons also, if you want to, like you can match surfaces and a person for a really nice like environment kill. Like if you want to kill someone by using the environment, so like you look at the surfaces and the person, and you can match actually the position of the bones of the other guy. So we talk about pose matching by matching our current bones positions, but you can also use the bones of your partners, like the interaction partners. You can choose an animation according to what the pose of the other guy is. So, conclusion. So motion matching is actually just, it's not a technology, like it's not really a middleware, it's more like a way of thinking about animation. So it's a simple idea that helps us reason about movement, description, and control. So it's really a two-way declarative interface. Like the animation declares what's in there, and the gameplay declares what it wants from the other side. And in the middle, you have the matching system that's going to try to find the best piece of data that matches best the goals that you want. But it's also, yeah, a new type of animation system that I think has, like, I convinced you that there's a couple of advantages. I can see three really big advantages. Like, first, it really preserves optimally the quality that you got at the mocap studio. So, like, it really keeps the details, it really feels organic, and, like, you really feel that the style is, like, preserved correctly. Controllable responsiveness, it means that like people that are worried that it won't be responsive enough, you can tweak it until everyone is happy, I think. And as a side effect, it was not really the goal, but like it really, that's what people normally remember about that, but it was really not the goal. Like the goal is really quality. But it happens that to get this kind of quality, we need a new type of system. And in this kind of system, like there's now really minimal manual work. You can just, it's really, really, really faster to get from mocap to the game. And I'll finish with this final shower thought. Let's just mark up the mocap with the inputs that should trigger the move and generate the game automatically. Why not? Maybe that doesn't really make sense, but I found it fun to just think about it a little bit, how you would actually do that, but yeah. Thank you. So there's no clapping because there's no one in the room, so bye at home, so thank you.